Hudson, and I'm here as always with Trade Martin and Bob Marks. This week's Harness Racing Alumni Show is sponsored by Winbak Farm Canada's newest staffing, Captain's Quarters. The son of Captain Treacherous is standing his first season with a stud fee of $5,000 Canadian. For more information or to book a breeding, call 905-838-2145 or email stallions@winbackfarm.com. Captain's Quarters. Also, the Meadlowlands Racetrack. Visit playthemeadowlands.com. And Hunterton Farm, breeding champions year after year. Visit huntertonfarm.com.
The Harness Racing Alumni Show with your hosts, Freddie Hudson and Trade Martin.
Joining us today for a continuation of last week's show, we have Donald Dancer returning. Donald, last week we spoke about Sonny Patterson, who recently passed away, and we also wanted to include Carmine in there, but we ran out of time. So this week we'll talk a little bit about Carmine and a couple other things about your career. So let's go back to when you started. You started at Cowtown. Where did you go from Cowtown? And let's follow your career a little bit.
Okay. Yeah, well, after Cowtown, like I said, I was 14, and I raced 2 heats there. And then I mentioned my dad about looking for some other spot that's a little closer to home that might be a little neater. I mean, it's a great place, but like I said, I was looking for somewhere a little closer to home. And New Brunswick had Johnson Park. So then we went to Johnson Park. And I took that same little mare I had, and Payson mare, and I took her over there. And then I had a few starts, and I finished in second, third, and I was like, oh, my God, when am I going to win a race, And then finally about my, I'd say, 8th or 9th start, I won. And it was just a great feeling. And so I won 2 heats with her that day, and then I, raced her more there. And then after Johnson, after that time was up there, I ended up being the leading driver at Johnson Park there for that meet, which they give an award and all that there. And then I went to Goshen, and Goshen had the amateur trot, and that was the Thomas W. Murphy amateur trot that would go in July 4th, I believe it was. And I was looking for a mount in that, and I asked my dad if we had anything. He said no, but he said he'd say something to Stanley, see if he had anything, and he did. He had a horse called the Sioux Grand Champ. And they put me up on him, and I was fortunate enough to be able to win with him 2 heats there. And that was a real trip because, like I said, I'm racing against all different age guys. And I'm 14 years old, and that was really quite a thrill. It really was. And my dad, not counting the chickens before they're hatched, he ran all the way from the paddock to the winner's circle, and everybody that's been there knows how far that is. And he did that both heats, and he would come down, and he had a bad leg, my father, and he would hobble down the track and come to winner's circle. And as you can tell, I never forgot that. That was something. And then from there, I did that at Goshen, and then continued the matinees when I was 15. Then 15, I raced in the matinees again, and we got a trotter for me to drive from Del Cameron that we paid $500 for. And he was a bit of a puller, and, but he stayed trotting, but he was a very grabby horse. And then I raced him in the matinees at Johnson Park. And then when I turned 16, then I could race in the fairs, which I raced in the New Jersey fairs and Pennsylvania fairs, and in qualifying races. And so 16 and 17, that's what I did. And then when I turned 18, I was able to get my P license. And on my birthday, I drove, when I turned 18, I had my P license and I could drive. You had to be 18, and I raced at Freehold, and I finished second again. I had a couple seconds. And I didn't win my first pari-mutuel race there until I was about maybe 10 drives again. And then I won with one of my dad's horses, a best of all, out of Miss Butler. It was a good bred family. And I won with him, Farmall was his name. And he eventually ended up with Ted Wing, the horse, a year or two later. But he was a nice horse, and that was a big thrill to me. So then I did that. And then the following year, when I turned 18, I hadn't got 18 yet because my birthday's in October. I raced at Atlantic City Race Course. And I was driving more horses for my dad at that point, and then catch driving too. And I ended up being the leading driver at Atlantic City in percentage. I was the percentage leading driver, and Mike Gagliardi had the most wins. So me and him shared the driving title there, and that was quite a thrill as well. So, I've been very fortunate, and then I raced into my P license until I turned 19. And then, like I mentioned earlier in the other segment of the show, then I got my A license when I was 19 because I had enough starts, and you had to be 19 in order to get it. And then I raced in New York and got, had some nice mounts there and did well also. So I had a good run, very good run, and got off to a great start and, got the experience. But my father, there was other mounts, and I would like to have them, and he told me no. He says, the owners have to want you. And if we ask them, the owners say no, that's the way it is. And he says, I'm not going to force them. He said, because they're not going to be happy. He says, it'll be the horse. If you win, it'll be because of the horse. And if you lose, it's going to be because of you. So he says, I'm not going to pressure the owners for you to drive. And if they want you, then they'll be okay with it. And then whatever happens, happens, So actually, our second trainer was driving horses instead of me. And I'm like, you got to be kidding me, But the owners wanted him and not me. So that's the way it was. And then many years passed.
Who was the second trainer at that time?
Art Allen. His name is Arthur Allen. He was Jimmy Allen's brother, actually.
Okay.
And, and then years later, Art Allen, who they picked over me, now I was driving for him. So, and it's kind of like a story with Stanley. Stanley worked for Jack Smith for a while, Jack Smith Sr., and then he ends up, ends up later on, Stanley turns into doing great in the business, and, but he was actually working for him at one point. So it's interesting, It's interesting. You never know how it's going to turn out.
Stanley also had Dick Baker with him for a long time.
Oh, yes. Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah, Dick Baker.
Yeah,
and
the rumor is that Stanley did, when he first started driving, didn't have any colors, and he borrowed Dick Baker's colors, and they became his.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, and then my dad worked for Stanley, too. Like when my father got out of the dairy business, and then he's working with the horses with Stanley, and then he said he was done with the dairy cattle, and he went into the business with Stanley. So then he started out with Stanley's colors as well, and then later he changed and got his own colors, which is what I used also. It's my father's colors, the same patterns, So yeah,
now the other brother was Harold, correct?
Harold Sr. Yes, correct.
Yes.
And he had his own design.
He was the one who originally started the harness racing above your Stanley and your dad, if I remember correctly. So. Yeah,
he was the first one in it. They ended up, my grandfather, James B. Dancer, he used horses for farm work and transportation, and that's how they started out. And then he traded a horse, and they wheel and deal, and he got a horse that was a racehorse. And he's like, really? So he's racing a freehold. So then they went to freehold and watched him race. And they decided to give it a shot, get into the business. So then Harold was actually the first one, other than my grandfather, to start doing it. Then the family would get involved. Like, you see the way the business had grown. Mm-hmm. And you start going there, and then you get interested too, and that's kind of how it took off. And then the brothers got into it, yeah. And then then their sons. Yeah. And then I had another uncle, Charles Dancer, and he drove a bus for Greyhound buses, and he didn't get into the business until later on in life. And after he retired as a bus driver, then he got involved, and he had a horse with my father, and he won some races, and great guy, really, really a gentleman, nice fella, and Then he got into the business. So, you know, the nephews and the cousins and everything, everybody was kind of in the business at one time, you know, one time or another. Yeah.
I remember when Ronnie was racing. He was racing at Libertyville, and he came over to Roosevelt and Yonkers and raced for a while there too.
Yes, he did. Yeah.
Well, now, let's talk a little bit about Carmine now. Carmine just recently passed away. Now, I know Carmine. I don't ever remember when I met him. I've known him my whole life. What memory of meeting Carmine?
Me, when I was very young, my father would take me to the track. We'd go to Yonkers and Roosevelt, and he'd get me into the paddock, you know, and I had to hang out in the paddock, of course, until he got done. And I was just accompanying him there, and I'd be, you know, watching TV or moseying around inside the paddock area, and then I'd see him. And, I mean, he was such a flamboyant figure. You know, just like Hervé, you know, he's such a personality, and you'd hear him a lot of times before you'd see him, and I could just remember him, the confidence that he would exude, as well as Hervé, you know, and a lot of these guys are like that, and some of them are reserved, and then some of them are not, that are top drivers, and that's the way he was. He was out there, man. Let me tell you something. He'd make me laugh. And I'd be like, wow, man, look at this guy. And then I'd study his driving as well, you know, and I used to talk to him about that. Years later, I was fortunate that, like I said in the other segment, that he'd be at Gateway Farm helping his son, and I'd be over there with my horses, you know, this is in the recent years, and we'd end up on the track together, and he'd fill in the little gaps. I'd ask him questions and talk to him about different things and different stories and things that I knew about and things I didn't know about. And we'd be chatting on the racetrack, and he would tell me different things. And one of them was, I used to ask him, he used to roll on the front end a lot. And he could back it down. He could back it down, like you talked to me earlier about. He could back it down, and he didn't. And so that was one of the questions I had for him. I said, why didn't you do that? And he says, because I didn't want him pulling on me, and I don't want him coming at me down the back stretch, heading to the three-quarter pole. And then he says, around the last turn, I'd actually take a hold of the horse and slow him down a little bit and get the bit right in his mouth. And then when I'd hit the head of the stretch, I'd go again. And I'd be like, wow, you know, like, now that made sense. That made sense to me because I'd see him do that. You know, like they'd seem like they're catching him, and then all of a sudden he'd take off again, you know. And, just a very talented driver, you know, very natural, get along with any horse, you know, and just a real talent, you know. And I used to get a kick out of talking to him. And then I ended up racing against him a lot, you know, in the years in the 80s, especially in the 80s when I was at Yonkers and Roosevelt. We'd race against each other a lot. And he only got mad at me one time in a race, like, his horse always was winning a lot, and I had a front runner, and the horse had a history of bearing out. And I come into the stretch, and I knew he's the only one to beat, and he's locked in behind me. And all I got to do is not bear out and let him through, you know, and I can win the race. So I wouldn't. And he kept trying to come up the inside, and I would not move. You know, he had like 3 feet maybe, but just not enough room to get bike up in there. Yeah. And I win, and he finished second, and he was so mad at me after the race. And I'm like, hey, we're competing, you know what I mean? I'm out here to win too, you know. and then I knew he was going to, you know, like at somewhere along the way it might pay, you know, get me back for that. But I really didn't do anything wrong, just trying to win. And then after that, you know, he let it go, and that was the end of that. He realized that I wasn't doing anything to try to hurt him. I was out to win just like he was. But, you know, you all can't win, you know. That's the way it was. That's the way it goes.
Yeah, one of the things that they mentioned about Carmine was he was very tight on dollars, and that he used to have Bobby Heil running around when Bobby Heil was training for him. Bobby Heil running around looking for whips that other guys were throwing away that he could use.
Yeah, and it's funny because he was the leading driver and he was doing great.
Yep.
And, year after year, that's where he got the reputation of the red man and, right down the road, down the pike with the horses. And, it was surprising to see that he was, a little tight with the money. But, it paid off because...
And then, like at the Meadowlands, when they had the Roosevelt Raceway, it was one of the reunions over there. When we came back from doing the autographs, we had come back up to the top, and there was no food there. All the food was gone. And so, but they had these hot dog stands up there, which were for the old-timers rollback thing. And so they were $1 hot dogs, but they have a hot dog stand right in where we're having the reception. And so Tony Abbatiello, Carmine, Frank Topfinger, Benny DeFons, and myself, we all went over to get hot dogs. And so Tony went first. He orders a hot dog, and the guy says that would be $1. Tony looked at him like it was unexpected. And so Tony just gives him a $5 bill, so just keep the change. So Carmine's next in line. So he turns around and says, Freddie, Frank, Benny, you guys want a hot dog? Yeah, that's what we're running line for. So Carmine goes, 4 hot dogs. And so he gives the guy a $100 bill and says, keep the change.
Yeah. Now, there's a story the opposite, that he wasn't so frugal there, Yeah. But it's interesting, like I said, he was a character, I could remember him, in the paddock there and, and on the racetrack and he was a very interesting guy. He really was.
Yep.
He's fairly missed.
And driving titles, he won driving titles, just at Roosevelt and Yonkers, I'm going to say over 20, but he also won titles at Monticello, Freehold, and I know that at the Meadowlands, he was for the first meet there in '76, he was the leading percentage driver. So
yeah, he could drive anywhere. He was very talented. It's about getting the mounts. If you don't get good mounts, like we've seen that before.
If you're driving all 20 and 30 to 1 shots, you're not going to look too good. You might get lucky once in a while, but you're not going to look too good.
If you don't have the power, and then the other thing, like we're talking about drivers and everything, it's about respect. You got to have respect for the horse that, like say the competition. You got to have respect for the competition. You got to respect the other drivers, and some of that you have to earn. You got to earn that respect. It's not just given. You might just say, all right, and then the guy or the horse isn't worthy of that respect. So I think that's a big play in the harness racing and probably thoroughbred racing too. Is you got to have respect for both the driver or jockey and the horses. I really do. Yeah. Makes a big difference.
I have another funny story. It doesn't involve Carmine. It involves Billy O'Donnell. And we were at the Meadowlands. My horse is dead at the half. I mean, my horse is just backing up at the half. And I'm sitting third or fourth, whatever. And my horse is just backing up. The horse is totally run out of gas. And everyone's just throwing it away from me. Everyone's just throwing it away from me. And, at the Meadowlands, when you come around and you're coming off that 3/4 ball and you can look down the stretch, well, what I can see when I'm looking down the stretch is I see every single horse that looks like they're crossing the wire, and I'm just hitting the head of the stretch. All of a sudden, Billy O'Donnell comes up alongside me. I didn't even know he was back of me. He comes up alongside me. He looks over me. He says, Freddie, this horse that I'm driving, he said a couple things about the horse, but he says, I'm going to beat you after this horse made like 20 breaks. And as he said that, he made a break with that one, and I ended up beating him. But I always remember that because it was just funny as hell because, this thing was dead at the half.
Right. Yeah.
There's nothing. This horse has no gas to it whatsoever. No gas.
Right. Yeah, there's run out. You feel like you're going to get run over. That's the problem back.
Run over. I couldn't keep up with anyone.
Yeah, that's it. Then somebody gets behind you, they all run over top of you. Yeah, I know. Yeah.
But he just sort of snuck up on me.
That's right. I had a guy that used to have a lot of comical laughs with I raced against in Delaware, and then Brandywine Liberty Bell and he worked for my uncle, Walter Ladine, and one time he came alongside me in a race, and we were like, it was kind of like a race, we're just sitting in the back, and neither horse is good, neither horse is doing anything, and he comes alongside me like you're saying, and I looked over at him, and he lifted his hand up, and he's like yawning. He's showing me like he's yawning to me, like he's so bored. And I'm like, get out of here. Oh, God, that was funny. Like you said, that's one of those things that make you laugh. You think back about it,
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, getting back to Carmine, mm-hmm. The Meadlowlands had a Carmine Abbatiello night a few weeks ago, and I hear that it was very successful. Carmine's restaurant, the Manhattan, basically catered the event, and Carmine's is named after Carmine. That was was Albert Cutler? Is Albert Cutler who was the founder of Carmine's? And the Cutler Memorial's named after him. And then if we go back even further, I'm going to say, I guess in the 80s, Roosevelt Raceway had a Carmine Abbatiello night too. And they had him driving around. They drove him around in a car around the track, and basically, I think he had Jimmy Marone driving the car with him, because he said he didn't want to face the crowd alone because they might kill him or something.
Yeah. No, he's a legend. He was like I said, the Red Man back then. When I was going up there as a kid, and then later on, But just, people's memories fade, a lot of them, they get it. Unfortunately, that's what's happened in our business. It's just that we've lost a lot of the fan base that we had, one way or another, we lost them. But you remember driving at Roosevelt and Yonkers. Yonkers, you usually get cursed at in 5 different languages when you were scoring down. Yeah.
I mean, you got cursed at in Chinese, whatever they were saying in Chinese. I have no idea.
Right. Yeah, I used to think that they were doing that just to vent, those people. Like they've had a bad day or they had a fight with their wife or whatever, and then they come to the track and they might not even bet. They just wanted to yell at somebody, and they can get away with it. They're just yelling and screaming at you and cussing at you. Yeah.
The other thing, I don't think the guys have racing today because the crowds are so small, is when you come to the half, and on the half-mile track, you come to the half, and you hear the crowd in the grandstands, and then going down the stretch, the crowd was part of the racing. Right,
that's right. Yeah, and then especially coming in the stretch, you hear the people yelling and screaming, And it's something. I feel bad for the fellas, the younger fellas today that have come up that didn't have that. You know what I mean? Because it was exciting, and I think the people in the crowd too. It was exciting for them, and I think that's what made a lot of people get into the business because of the energy that was projected there. And it would have been nice if that could have kept going on. It really would have, because it brought it alive. It was like electricity. You know what I mean? Yeah, that's true.
Well, it was like it was like performing before a live audience. Roosevelt and Yonkers had 20,000 during the weeks and 30,000 on weekends, and some of their big nights, like a Monday night, I remember they had like 40,000 on one Monday night, and they had all the free-for-all races on a Monday night.
Yeah, it's a question of like, where have all the people gone? You know what I mean? They could write a book about it, write a story, because you wonder to yourself what happened. What happened to the people? Where did they all go?
You look at the drivers back then. A guy would go in and win 2 races in one night. He only had 2 mounts in. Or like I was looking at Stanley just recently on some old charts. On Stanley went in, he won 4 races. He only had 4 starts. Jimmy Cruz, when he won the 6 races at Roosevelt, he only had 6 mounts.
Yes. And they didn't have the long year meets like they do, I could remember they used to stop towards the end of the year, October or so, and then you didn't race back until the spring, you know.
Right.
And you had to, you know, you blistered it and turned out the horses and blistered them, and you brought them back nice and slow, you know, and then you were back to the track again in the spring, you know. That's the way I remember it as a kid, you know. Mm-hmm.
Also, you didn't just stop with the horses; you backed them down. It's just like the way you brought them up to train them, you backed them down. I remember that too before you turned them out.
Yeah, you jogged them down. Yeah, you jogged them down instead of up. Yeah, yeah, I remember. Yeah, like I said, it was a different ball game, and I believe that's why the horses lasted so long. Where you see horses raced, as I'm sure you remember, horses raced to 14 years old. You know.
Yep.
And you'd see 13-year-olds, 12-year-olds, you know, 14-year-olds. And, you know, it wasn't surprising to see that. But it is today.
But also, if you remember, when you went to yearling sales, you were buying a yearling to be a racehorse. So that same yearling that you bought, you'd have them 6 years later. Or, and you'd just be bringing them back, and
Yeah. Yeah, now they're looking to make it, you know, they all got it in their minds, they're buying them as a future champion, you know, I believe. That they're buying them as a yearling and they're hoping they turn into a champion. And I think that that's what hurts a lot of the horses because they get pushed further and longer than they should be. Yeah, you know, they're expecting too much out of them.
Too hard too.
Yeah, you're better off quitting with them and get them ready as a 3-year-old, you know, and try it again. And see how they do. And I know a lot of good horses that we had, if we hadn't quit with them and give them time, and sometimes some of them didn't race till they were 4 and 5 years old. And because we get them down and then they get off again, just turn them out, quit with them again. And where people today look at you like, what are you, crazy? You know, you ain't going to do that. They just sell them. They just get rid of them. And then you gave them time, especially if they showed talent, you know. You gave them time and let them, you know, get stronger, let them heal up, whatever it may have been wrong with them. And a lot of it's immaturity problems. And they get better, and then here they come. And we had a few like that, you know. I know this Gambit Lobel that's on YouTube. I won the open trots with him. He didn't race till he was 5 years old, you know. And he was a Speedy Crown and beautiful horse. We paid, I think our owner paid $200,000 for him. And he was a talented horse, but he kept getting off. So rather than break him down or just get rid of him, we quit with him again and give him time and bring him down again. And then the same scenario happened again. He get off again. We quit with him again and turned him out, you know. And as you know, back then, too, you used to switch the horses from trot to pace.
Yep.
And if they couldn't stay trotting, you know, they would get sore on the trot, you put them on the pace. And then they went on the pace for a while, and if that worked out fine, if not, you put them back on the trot again, you know. I mean, that was back in the day, you know.
And I had one racing up in Monticello. I forgot her name, but I raced her 1 week on the pace, and I raced her the next week on the trot. So, and it basically it shows up the charts and everything. It's like 2 different horses. Because you get the yellow papers, you have the yellow papers for the trotters and the blue papers for the racers, and they didn't put the together. So. Yeah, for sure. And that's what helped me a lot because, like I said, I worked with, you know, yearlings and then getting them going and then, you know, starting to try and make speed with them slowly. Yep.
And not going too far with them to sour them up and stuff. So I had the experience of working with young horses. Then I had the experience of like that. We'd have a horse on the pace, and then we'd switch him and put him on the trot. And then he'd be going on the trot for a while, and then put him back on the pace. So I had that experience, which wasn't costing me anything because I didn't own those horses at the time. I was just helping train them with my father, and I was learning all this stuff. And I was like, wow, ain't this something, you know? So, but it helped you have patience and helped you develop, you know, your hands and to help try to make speed, but yet hold them together at the same time. And you just, it's a different world today because these horses are so natural today that are coming out. They're right away. They're supposed to trot, they trot. They're supposed to pace, they pace. And I don't believe you hardly see any of these that are switching, you know, like we're talking about here, you know? Yeah, they just get rid of them if they're not going to be a a trotter, they get rid of him. If they're not going to be a good pacer, they just, find a new home for him,
Well, they used to disqualify trotters if they switched over to the pace. I don't want to insult the judges, but I think many of the judges today wouldn't know if a horse switched over to the pace.
Yeah, and another big thing that helped change the business, helped a lot of the horsemen with these kind of horses that hurt the really good horsemen, was the trotting hobbles. When they come up with the trotting hobbles, I mean, it helped keep the horses on stride, keep them trotting. And back then, it was your hands, and it was balancing the horses, yes, and prevent them, try to, with the shoeing, stop them from hitting, and have the right equipment on them. And so much of that was that, and you had to have them sounder. You had to have the horse pretty sound in order so he would stay trotting. And then when the trotting hobbles come along, that was like, I don't want to say masking, but it helped. It helped people get along with them further and longer, and they could go faster and help keep them on stride. And that made a big difference in our business, I hate to say it, but it did. And I think that's why you see so many of the horses that are using trotting hobbles, because it's hard to race a horse that doesn't have trotting hobbles when you're racing against somebody who has them on, and you're dusting out of there going a 28 and a piece quarter or 29 second quarter, and they got trotting hobbles and you don't, and they're able to keep going where you got to help your horse a bit, and the next thing you know, the guy gets around you, and it made a big difference. I believe it made a big difference in the sport. Yeah, and then they make different versions.
I think what they should do nowadays, I think that they should have a three-legged face race, or set something up for three-legged pacers and have a race that way. Because most of these horses, we know that they can go 2 minutes or 1:55 three-legged. So why not have a race with it and have guys really hold the horses together going three-legged? So.
Yeah, well, that's another ball game too. Like I had a Most Happy Fellow colt that never had the hobbles on ever. And I was training him down. And I kept thinking, what's going to be the day that's going to be the telling point that I'm going to have to put hobbles on this horse? And he never did. He was perfect, And Most Happy Fellows used to get a little steppy, a lot of them, and this horse wasn't. He was just a really nice horse, and he went on and raced. And me and my father owned him, and he raced in New York in the ABC classes. And Delinsko actually drove him for me a few times when I couldn't be there to drive him. And he won with the horse one time. Yeah. So, I mean, he was really a nice horse. He was really a nice horse. Pleasure. And eventually they sold him. He went across seas. But, like I said, three-legged horses are another thing. Hard to find, hard to find.
Yeah.
We used to see them back then, but as years passed, that was another thing that that's kind of passed on by. People don't even mess with it, because they think they're giving up something. That's what I believe. They think they're giving up something with speed or having to hold them together a little bit, and they don't want to have to do that.
Well, they have to be a lot faster. When I hear the size of the hobbles that they have on these horses nowadays, like 65, 66 inches, where we were like 55, 56 inches.
Yeah, so I'd say that was around the average, 56, 57. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And his stride's got to be much longer.
Yeah. I think Silk Stocking's one of the greatest horses that had a very short hobble, I think she was very short, her hobble. And but horses, some of them are like that, just depends on the horse. I think it's how they get over the ground, how light they are, light on their feet, like you hear that just like with an athlete, And if they're light on the feet and use a little effort, they just kind of float over the ground, it's so much easier for them than, of course, a horse that's hard going, hits the ground hard. And it's just, how nice they are, easy on themselves, The horse is hot-headed and grabs on and stuff like that. It's harder on the horse versus just a relaxed, easygoing horse and knows that when it's time to get serious,
Right.
a competitor, type of thing. Yeah. Yes, I mean, there's some great times, but the business has sure changed. But there again, there's credit to the drivers and the horsemen back in the day, just like, Carmine and, Hervé and my family and your dad that could drive horses that weren't that good, bad gated, do bad things. They would do bad things.
Trying to fall down.
Yeah, run off the track, wheel, you know what I mean, stick their toes in. Horses that would balk and not go. All of a sudden they change their mind and just throw themselves. And you're dealing with that to what we have today. And the horses are so much better mannered today. And, it's just how they've evolved. And I think one of the reasons that they've evolved is because the other ones didn't make it. Like you weeded them out. Yep. And when you stop breeding bad horses and then you start breeding better horses, I think that then naturally that's what you end up with. Because you think about that. When you look back, you say, how the heck did we ever end up like this? You know what I mean? And that's how, because it was non-productive. It wasn't productive to have these kind of horses that the mare had a mark of 210, and that's all she could go, and then you bred her, and her baby could only go 210, her foal, and then you breed her again maybe, and the same thing. I mean, you're done. You just can't keep going back for more. And they just weeded these kind of horses out. Or bad actors. The horse throw themselves. You had enough. Get them out of here. No more. Yeah. So I think it's a process of elimination, and now look at the great, how they act today and how fast they go. It's just amazing. And I think the equipment, and the equipment made a big difference too, and all the different equipment, everything. We used to wear heavy, everything was heavy stuff, if you think about it. And then we kept going lighter and lighter and lighter. And the race bikes have evolved. I'm not a big fan of it, for safety wise, but for aerodynamics, I believe that's where they made a big difference. The race bikes. Yeah.
Well, if you remember when we started, we used to have long tracers on our bikes.
Yeah. Everything became lighter and easier. You know what I mean? Lighter and the quick hitch, rather than wrapping them in. And I think all those things, it's just a combination of this, and this, and this, and it kept improving the speed. And that's why, like a friend of mine, that same fellow I was mentioned before, Walladine, he's big into knowledge about the thoroughbreds too. And he says where they have not improved, like the speed has not improved, he tells me. And I don't follow it like he does, but that's what he's telling me. And yet, look at our business, how we just keep going faster and faster and faster. It's just amazing, just amazing. It really is. So I don't know. But like I said, once again, it's credit to the horsemen that didn't have these kind of horses to be driving back in the day,
Oh, yeah.
They were driving these horses that put in steps, jump over things. That's something that we didn't talk about. They'd leap over stuff or see things that aren't there. And, I mean, that's kind of hard to avoid when you don't even see it. It's not really there.
I haven't seen on any of the horses now, Rich, and I haven't seen any brush shadow rolls, and I haven't seen any peekaboo bridles and stuff like that, and I have not seen a leather set of hobbles anyplace. So
yeah, that was the other thing, leather hobbles. Yeah, we had a nice filly one time that was training, and she'd jump over things. And she was a nice filly, pacing filly. So my father told me, he says, now listen, I'm going to tell you, you follow me and you don't pull out until I tell you to pull out. Ever. You mean ever. So I said, okay. So every time we train in sets, and I just follow him. And I mean, not right over top of his head in case something happened. I was like a neck off of him, in case something happened. And I'd follow him and never let me pull out. Just follow me. And finally, we trained her down to around 15, I believe it was. And then he says, today, if everything goes right, he says, I'm going to tell you to tip her out and let her pace coming home in the stretch. I said, all right. So we turned for home, and he says, okay, come on out with her. And I come out, and she was perfect. And from that day on, she was perfect. She got over that jumping over stuff. Yeah. So that was a great experience. And, I mean, we did the same thing. We had brush saddles. We had peekaboo bridles, peekaboo bridles with windows on the side so they could see to the side, with extensions on the peekaboo. So. Yeah, and we had an extension on the peekaboo at the bottom, we tried everything. We did, there wasn't much we didn't try, And, but that was, some of the great things that came out of that was you learn to work with different horses with different hang-ups, different problems, and help them get over it. And I believe that all helped me, driving.
Oh yeah,
I really do.
But there were so many great horsemen that going back. I mean, like training at Roosevelt when you were on the track, you were not knowing at the time, but like many of the trainers that were training there became Hall of Famers.
Right. Yeah. There were or became. Right.
Yep.
That's right. Yeah, that's for sure.
Yeah, and I don't think many of them cared whether they made it to the Hall of Fame or not.
No. And I go back to, we had a horse that I would take care of after school. I was like around 12, and we had a horse that was by a Payson sire. But then they test bred the horse, and the only way they test bred a stallion to sell him across seas at that time was to prove that he could get a mare and foal. So they bred her to a riding horse. And the vet did, that we had, Dr. Mears. Yep. So now we got a foal out of him, by him, and now he proved that he could actually have a foal, a sire foal. So now we got this horse to train. So he's half standard bred, non-standard bred, they'd call it. So we got the papers on him, and so now they want to try him. So my father, he gave him to me. He said, "You go ahead and do whatever." So he had nothing to lose. So he gives me the horse. We put him over in like a little two-star barn that we had off by itself there in New Egypt, and then I'm trying to get him going, and he could go in 3:20. 3 minutes and 20 seconds was the fastest, after all that time putting into him, to get him to go. So one day I was frustrated, and I was out there, and I was putting the whip to him, trying to get him to go faster. And my father saw me, and he says, "Son, let me tell you something right now." He said, "If you don't have more patience than that," he said, "you choose a different profession that you want to get in, because this is not going to be for you." And it was like he cut me with a knife, man. And I'm like, "Really?" He said, "Yeah, no." He said, "That's not going to work." He said, "The horse, it's not his fault. He just can't do it. He doesn't have it. He's not bred for it." So I said, "Okay." But I never forgot that lesson, and he did that with me a couple of times. If I went too fast, I didn't listen to what he told me or whatever. And he told me, he says, "Listen to me. You got to do what I tell you. If you don't do it," he says, "find another line of work." Oh my God. He says, "So it's important, these things I'm telling you, and if you don't listen to me," he says, "it's not going to work for you." So I said, "Okay." So I never forgot those life lessons that he gave me, and I definitely owe it to him. Any success that I've had, I owe it to my father. I really do.
That's good. With that, I'm going to close the show out. We've basically been on here for a good half hour. So, Donald, thank you for coming back on. And
sure.
Always great to have you. And we're going to have you back.
Same here,
many more times. I might just have you be a guest host one time now.
I don't know. We'll have to talk about contract for that.
Okay.
I'll have my people call your people, and your people can call my people. Let's see if we can work out a contract. All right, Freddie. It's always a pleasure. And thank you very much for having me on and inviting me, and have a good day.
Okay. This week's Harness Racing Alumni Show is sponsored by Winbak Farm Canada's newest staffing, Captain's Quarters. The son of Captain Treacherous is standing his first season with a stud fee of $5,000 Canadian. For more information or to book a breeding, call 905-838-2145 or email stallions@winbakfarm.com. Captain's Quarters. Also, the Meadlowlands Racetrack. Visit playthemeadowlands.com. And Hunterton Farm, breeding champions year after year. Visit HuntertonFarm.com. That's a wrap for this week's show. Thanks for listening, and please join us again next week.
The Harness Racing Alumni Show